G'day! Today I thought I would do a little bit of a green eye look and talk about one of my favourite things ever, which is the 1947 Roswell UFO crash. I'm sure everybody has heard of the Roswell crash, and maybe you've made your mind up on it, maybe you haven't, but I want to talk about some of the things that I find pretty compelling about this particular government cover-up, if you will, and yeah, just stick some makeup on while we talk about it. Okay, I'm going to start with this very light green here from the MAC. It's Designer Art Library palette, and that's basically going to be my outer like blending shade, if you will.
Let's make some music.
Okay, so while I do that, let's get cracking into the story that I want to tell you. So take yourself to Roswell, New Mexico in July 1947, early July. And for them that's in their summer, and they get pretty massive summer thunderstorms over there. You know, just those hot thunderstorms that they get. And one night after, a few days after a particularly bad thunderstorm, there was a rancher named Mac Brazier, and he was on his land, and these ranches over there are huge, by the way. They're like miles. If you think of like in New Zealand how there are some farms where it's like, you know, the farmers have to drive for like a couple of hours to get to their like back paddock, that's like kind of the extent of some of these ranches. So Mac Brazier was out and about in his ranch, and he noticed, he was just out doing his walk, and he noticed these really large like divot kind of, you know, marks in the ground, like really big ones, and he found like some scattered debris and shit laying around, which was unusual because it's a bit of a wasteland out there. So yeah, he wanted to clean them up, just get all the debris off his land, because he found like a big trail of debris, and so he collected up as much as he sort of could see or like found really at the time, and chucked it in the shed and then forgot about it. A few days later, he it kind of gnawed away in the back of his mind. He showed them to a few of his neighbours, and they were all kind of baffled because there was like some weird, like not English or like not sort of like earthly language hieroglyphics and shit on these beams. And so yeah, like a few neighbours had a good look at them. One of them had noticed like a bit of like weird activity in the sky recently, and yeah, so the Air Force basically came down and had a squiz. And what the Air Force found was that they couldn't really like cut any of the metals with a knife or anything. They couldn't burn any of like what like felt like wood. It was just like really strange materials, and they didn't really know what to do with it. And so the Air Force officials that came and inspected it and like went through the property and stuff immediately issued a statement to the press saying that they found a flying saucer, and it's a very famous newspaper headline. And one of these Air Force high-ups was Major Jesse Marcel, and he was an information officer, or intelligence officer, sorry. And he had actually taken some of the wreckage away, and he had showed his son, who like lived obviously past him, and the son spoke of like metal that you would crumple it up in your hand, and it would not hold its crumpled shape, like it would just go back to a smooth, almost like a silk but a metal, like really hard, like indestructible. Yeah, so like Major Marcel had been there for like, you know, in the Air Force for a long time. He was more than familiar with weather balloons and so forth like that. He knew that what they had was not a weather balloon at all. And within a few days, the Air Force basically came through. They took all of the debris that had been uncovered at that point, and they went and snatched up all the newspapers that they could get, and they forced Major Marcel to go and do like an official retraction, and they forced him to go and tell the press that it was actually just a weather balloon that he'd uncovered. And he said that this was really awful for him because he had to like pose with a newspaper photo beside wreckage, which like was weather balloon wreckage but not the same wreckage as what he'd found. Okay, I'm just gonna switch to this Morphe Color Burst palette and like try and like get involved with some of these greens along here. Okay, and I'm just gonna change my brush up and put it in a little bit more of a I guess. Rounded, whatever. So while all this was happening, the Air Force had like immediately gone and secured the crash site, which is to say that they went and they completely secured all of the ranch, like all of the area around it, and they weren't letting people in, like even local sheriff and stuff. They were just turning away everybody, and they had like hundreds of military men had to go and like do what you'd call like a transect, which is where you when you see when they're looking for like missing persons, and you see cops walking through like fields or something, and they're like right next to each other, and they're absolutely like scanning the ground. So the Air Force had them out doing that, which is pretty extreme if it was just a weather balloon, right? But they also found a second crash site. So there had been like the initial crash that like put these big grooves in Mac Brazel's ranch, and so that had obviously been like and then obviously gone and crashed somewhere else. So there was the trail of debris, which was the, I guess, the first crash site that everyone knew about, and then you know, some few clicks away they found a second crash site which actually had a craft, and in that craft they found supposedly they found some victims of the crash, and there were a few eyewitnesses that did get to see this at this point, not townspeople but like military people, and apparently they were quite short, had like sort of four fingers is like what everyone's saying, with like almost like little suction things on the end of their fingers, and that I think it was something like 2 or 3 of them were dead, but one was still alive. And there were reports of soldiers who had seen the alive entity, had eye contact with it and could feel that it was scared and stuff like that. So, you know, there are some reports about that. Anyway, they got the creatures away to the local base, and they basically had to like preserve the bodies and perform an autopsy. Now the local mortician, whose name was Glenn Dennis, he got a call like in the middle of the night from them asking about like how to preserve a body like for embalming and stuff, and whether he had any like child-sized coffins, like small coffins. And he also went on to say that he had he knew a local woman who was like a military nurse, and she had been present at the autopsy basically, and that she spoke to him, but she was like terrified and she didn't say very much. And I always find that quite fascinating. I'm just going to deepen this green a little bit, but with this bright, this is a really cool bright looking green here. I don't know if it's gonna, yeah, I think this will be okay. So what they did, all the wreckage, they basically loaded up a B-52 bomber with all of the wreckage, and that was transferred to, I think it was Wright-Patterson Air Base. And so that was like a big operation. There were soldiers that were on board of that flight, and they have there are accounts where soldiers have, like, you know, they had their higher up colonel or whatever they are was like sitting in the front, and he would like make jokes about like what they were transporting, but without actually like really saying what it was. But you know, basically everyone was really terrified. They knew that they were transporting something like really sensitive and classified, and you know, there'd obviously been a lot of buzz already around the Roswell base about like what was happening and stuff, but there was a lot of you know, partial information need to know. Basically the Air Force and like their government really like got in immediately, and they created a lot of confusion amongst like even the soldiers on the base and stuff. It was very clear that they had like one mission, and that was really to just like lock this down, keep it out of like any knowledge of like anybody, and to deal with it in the way that they wanted to. This is a really cool green, by the way. So one of the guys who worked at the base. His name was Lieutenant Walter Hart, and he was the public relations guy for like the Roswell base. And he was the one that issued the initial press release and the secondary backpedaling press release. And this was all on the orders of Colonel William Blanchard, who was the base commander basically. And Lieutenant Hart basically wrote a testimony that wasn't to be open until after he died. And in that testimony he spoke of the crash, his version of events and what had happened, and he described seeing the alien entities. And Lieutenant Hart also talks about a really high level meeting that he had with Colonel Blanchard and Air Force Commander General Roger Ramey. And at this really high official meeting, bits of the debris were handed around, and all of these government officials and very high ups in the armed forces were passing it around, everyone was fucking perplexed. Then there's also Lieutenant Corso, Philip James Corso, and he worked for the army from 1942 to 1963, and he served in the White House for 4 years, and he was on Eisenhower's special task force and stuff. He wrote a book, and basically it's called The Day After Roswell, and it details about how he was given a cabinet, or a compendium of anything to do with Roswell, and his job was basically foreign defense. And what his job mainly involved was anything that was technological that was recovered from the crash. It was his job to feed into back into research and development for large companies. So companies like Werner von Braun, Bell Labs, stuff like that. And basically this was all stuff that was the precursor to silicon chip, fiber optics, things like that. So this was kind of how the government fed it back into the American research and development, because they pretended it came from foreign technology. And no, that's kind of really hard to prove or deny or whatever, because it's foreign tech. The enemy's not gonna give you their blueprints, are they? So in his book he details all of the stuff. He spent some time around the bases, and he also saw this wreckage and stuff himself, and he's detailed conversations that he's had with other officials. Okay, I'm gonna have a crack at this Kat Von D Earthling. This Earthling, it's a shimmery green, and I'm just gonna chuck it on my lids. So yeah, I know that this is all very circumstantial evidence, but later on the US Air Force or Army or whoever came back and tried to tell them that it was a story that they were testing, oh fuck, I can't remember what it was, but basically they then in the 90s they tried to say that they admitted that there were entities. So for the first time in 50 years they said, yeah, there were little beings, but they were just crash test dummies. So they changed their official story to from a weather balloon to saying that they were testing top secret balloons designed to search for atomic warfare stuff, and that the alien bodies were crash test dummies, which feels kind of weird, because why would you put crash test dummies on those anyway? And yeah, I don't know if I buy that. I've got this Yves Saint Laurent palette, and it's got a pretty nice dark green there, so I might just try and chuck that just a little bit along the lash line. Don't know how it's gonna go, but we shall see. Nice, just to give my eyes a little bit of a smoke. A schmuck. But yeah, there's so many high ups. I mean, the stuff that I've talked about, this is only the tip of the iceberg. I'm not going to spend a makeup story telling you about all the shit that I've read, all the multitude of books, but there is so much more information. Like, what I'm saying is just a brief summary, and like there's so much stuff that's backed up by credibility, and like there's just an unbelievable number of people who have very, very high up stations within the Air Force or the military or even the White House or CIA that have come forward and like talked about this sort of stuff. Like, I guess because it's been long enough that there's not going to be the consequences that there would have been in the past. So yeah, this is definitely one of my favourite things. I love the thought of this happening. I can see why the government would cover it up. It's just that gatekeeping of knowledge kind of thing. It's, you know, like those men's secret societies, they just want to have the power, and knowledge is the power. So I understand why they would cover it up. And like one of the most intriguing parts about the story to me is that it ended up getting it ended up getting disseminated like through the government in such a way that it fell to like a small group of people that were like shadow government within shadow government. And even the president, like if you became president, you would still be told no, nothing, because this organization within like the government and CIA, they view the president as just a temp basically, because it's, you know, a three year or 6 year if you will, it's just a short-term thing. And so they don't trust the president with this kind of information because that's just a temp, and it's on such a high clearance. And the way that they've done all of this through like complete subterfuge is that now it's so murky, like the trail to this information is so murky that like it's almost like lost because so few people know about it now, because they did such a fucking great job of covering it up, not only from the public but from their own government, which I think is a really fascinating look at how the US government operates. You know, you gotta give them snaps. This whole idea that like people who believe in aliens are total kooks and crazy, well, the reason that that's out there is because that's literally what they want you to think. They happily let all the legitimate reports go through. Like the Pentagon released those videos recently, the radar videos of the incredible flying objects, and like they've done such a good job of like trampling down the UFO thing, to the point where even when the Pentagon like says, yep, that's UFO, people kind of don't bat an eyelid because everyone's put it in the crazy basket. You know, because they've encouraged people to come forward with stupid, crazy stories, and it discredits the people that actually, like, it discredits the actual, like, realistic stuff. So, I mean, kudos to them, because they've done what they set out to do, which is to cause confusion and discreditation, and get the public thinking how they want them to think. I'm thinking a pink and a purple. I'm just going to stick with this MAC palette because it's got a really good pink and purple on there, and they look like cool, playful UFO colours. So I'll take the pink in the middle. And I'll take the purple and come in from the other side. Oh hell yeah, that's cool. Mascara! So in light of the theme of today's show, I thought I could have a crack at this Morphe highlighter palette, which is astronomically themed. I thought this ultraviolet could be pretty fucking fun. I'm not sure how strong this is, so I've never used it before. Oh, yes. Oh my god. This is so very cool. I really want to get quite extra on this because it is really pretty. I'm feeling my Roswell glow. I'm living my alien dream.
make some music.
You can believe what you want to believe about Roswell, but the fact remains is that something crashed and the government went fucking ham trying to cover that shit up.